A couple of years back, I started waking up every morning feeling heavy, bloated, like my body was running 2 gears slower than it should. I'd eaten the same way for years, nothing had changed, and yet something clearly had. I looked it up, and I wasn't the only one. According to the American Gastroenterological Association, around 40% of Americans deal with functional digestive problems significant enough to affect their daily life. 40%. That's not a niche issue. That's nearly every other person in the room. The standard fixes: antacids, laxatives, fiber supplements, probiotic capsules at $12 a bottle. Americans spent over $7 billion on over-the-counter digestive remedies in 2023 alone, and that number keeps climbing every year. The market is growing because people keep buying, and people keep buying because the symptoms keep coming back. Now, I want to be honest with you. I'm not here to tell you to throw away your medication. I'm a retired nurse, and I would never say that. What I'm going to tell you is what I actually changed in my kitchen, and what happened. It turned out the answer wasn't in the supplement aisle at all. It was in the oldest dietary record we have. 12 specific foods, referenced in biblical texts, eaten by people for 3,000 years, that researchers are now studying for very precise effects on gut function, inflammation, blood sugar, and cardiovascular health. Not because of the scripture, because the mechanisms check out. I went through every one of them, changed almost nothing else, and within about 6 weeks, that heavy, slow feeling was gone. My digestion had not been that consistent in years. I'm not telling you it'll be 6 weeks for you. I don't know your situation, but I am going to show you exactly what I added and what the research says each one does inside the body. 12 foods. I'll walk through each one, the mechanism, the evidence, and how I actually use it. Number 4 is the one I'd been eating wrong my entire life. Turns out a 30-second change in how you prepare it is the difference between it working and it doing almost nothing. We'll get to that. Every bottle of olive oil in my pantry gets used twice. Once for cooking, just a low-temperature drizzle, nothing high heat, and once as medicine. Well, not medicine exactly, but there's no better word for what it does. In 2005, a researcher named Gary Beauchamp was eating fresh olive oil at a tasting in Sicily. He noticed something unusual, that burning sensation at the back of the throat from really good, fresh, extra virgin oil. He recognized it. It was the same sensation he'd felt in trials for ibuprofen. Turns out, a compound in olive oil called oleocanthal works on inflammation through almost the same pathway as ibuprofen. Not as fast, but with every single meal. That's a very different proposition. His paper ran in Nature in 2005. It wasn't small news. And then there's the PREDIMED trial, a large randomized study out of Spain, originally published in the New England Journal of Medicine in 2013 and republished in a corrected form in 2018 after the authors identified randomization irregularities at some of the study centers. The republished results held over 7,000 people at cardiovascular risk, and the group assigned to a Mediterranean diet with extra virgin olive oil had significantly fewer major cardiac events than the control group. The findings survived the correction. That matters. The oil referenced throughout the Old Testament, in Exodus, in the anointing rituals, in the temple lamps. It's this same oil, cold-pressed from stone. The Creator, it seems, had very good nutritional instincts. Here's what I actually do, and it's simple enough that there's no reason not to. I use 3 tablespoons of good extra virgin olive oil every single day, not cooked, raw, drizzled on salad, on roasted vegetables, on a warm piece of sourdough right before eating. Oleocanthal holds up reasonably well at normal cooking temperatures. It doesn't vanish the moment the pan gets warm. What research does show is that extended high heat reduces its biological activity meaningfully. So, my rule is simple. I don't cook with the good oil. I add it after. Drizzle over the finished dish. Stir it into a warm soup right before serving. The food's already hot enough to carry the flavor. You don't need to fry with it. Buying advice. The label needs to say extra virgin and give you a harvest date, not just a best buy. If you can't find a harvest date, find a different bottle. The polyphenols degrade fast. A 2-year-old bottle of extra virgin olive oil is basically just regular fat at that point. There's a moment in the book of Isaiah, chapter 38, where King Hezekiah is gravely ill. The prophet tells his attendants to press a fig poultice onto the wound. The king recovers. Now, this is scripture. Make of it what you will. But here's what I find interesting from a botanical standpoint. Figs contain an enzyme called ficin. It's proteolytic, meaning it breaks down protein. The same action that helps with digestion also appears to be behind its traditional wound care use. Ficin doesn't survive cooking, which is why the poultice was applied fresh and pressed. Ethnopharmacological research has documented this use across multiple ancient cultures, not just biblical ones. From a nutrition standpoint, figs are underestimated. 100 grams of fresh fig gives you nearly 3 grams of fiber, a meaningful amount of potassium, and a suite of phenolic compounds, chlorogenic acid, syringic acid, that show antioxidant activity in preliminary laboratory data. The fiber profile is worth pausing on. Figs are particularly high in pectin, the same soluble fiber you find in apple skins. Pectin acts as a prebiotic. It feeds the beneficial bacteria in the gut before anything else. If there's a lazy bowel in your family, you know who I mean, figs are a gentler place to start than a lot of what gets sold in the supplement aisle. Fresh figs in season. That's the ideal. But the season is short, so the rest of the year I use dried. 2 or 3 dried figs in the morning, chopped and stirred into oatmeal or plain yogurt. Consistent. Simple. That's the protocol. For fresh figs, when I have them and eat at room temperature, not cooked. The ficin enzyme is heat sensitive. Cooking the fig gives you the nutrition but neutralizes the enzyme activity. That distinction matters depending on why you're eating them. A drizzle of raw honey on top. Nothing else. Simple as that. Pomegranates appear in the Book of Numbers, in the Song of Solomon, embroidered on the hem of the high priest's robe. Whatever symbolic meaning you attach to that is your own. What I can tell you is the biochemistry, which is remarkable enough on its own terms. Pomegranates contain compounds called punicalagins. These are large antioxidant molecules, among the most potent found in any food tested. But here's the thing, your body can't actually use them as is. What happens is, your gut bacteria break punicalagins down into smaller molecules called urolithins. And urolithins have been studied for their effects on cellular cleanup, the process by which old, damaged cell components get cleared out and recycled. A study by Aviram and colleagues, published in the journal Atherosclerosis in 2000, looked at pomegranate juice and oxidation of LDL, the kind of cholesterol damage that preliminary research links to arterial buildup. The findings were significant enough that the research was replicated multiple times over the following decade. Not every person produces urolithins, by the way. It depends on which bacteria are present in your gut. Studies suggest roughly a third to half of adults in Western populations are what researchers call urolithin producers. The others get the fiber and vitamins but miss that secondary benefit. This is one reason gut health keeps coming up in conversations about food. The food isn't working alone. I seed mine by hand. I know, there are faster ways, but I seed by hand because it slows me down, and I always end up eating more than I planned. A half cup of fresh seeds is my standard serving. That gets stirred into yogurt, added to a salad, or eaten straight from the bowl. The goal is consistency over the week, not a large dose all at once. On juice. If you go that route, buy it unsweetened and look for juice with the arils pressed in, not just the outer skin. A 4-ounce serving is plenty, more than that, and the sugar load starts to undercut what you're trying to do. I drink mine alongside a handful of walnuts, which we'll get to in a moment. Garlic is the one I hear people dismiss because it's too common. Oh, we all know about garlic. Do we, though? Because most people are using it in a way that eliminates the compound that makes it work. Here's what actually happens. A raw, intact garlic clove contains 2 separate components, allin and an enzyme called allinase. They're stored in different compartments inside the cell. When you crush or chop the clove, those compartments rupture and the 2 components meet. The reaction produces allicin. and that's the compound that matters. Allicin is what has the antimicrobial effect. It's what kills gram-positive and gram-negative bacteria in laboratory studies. The problem is heat. Allicin is unstable at cooking temperatures. If you drop a whole uncrushed clove into a hot pan, you've essentially locked the two components apart and applied heat before they ever meet. No allicin forms. You get the flavor, but the mechanism is gone. The timing matters. There's a review of clinical trials, 20 randomized controlled studies with nearly 1,000 participants, published in the Journal of Nutrition in 2016, looking at garlic supplementation and blood pressure. The pooled analysis found a meaningful reduction in systolic pressure, particularly in people who were already elevated. That's not a small finding. These aren't lab mice. Crush or finely chop 2 cloves. Set them aside for 10 minutes. That resting time lets the allicin fully develop before you do anything else. This is the step most recipes skip, and it is the most important step. After the 10 minutes, eat them raw if you can manage it, stirred into salad dressing, into hummus, into yogurt-based sauces. If cooking is the only option, add the crushed garlic at the very end of cooking, not the beginning. Let the food come off the heat first, then stir in the garlic. This preserves considerably more of the active compound than standard sautéing. One note on the smell. Yes, I know. I don't apologize for garlic breath in this house, but if it's a concern, raw parsley eaten immediately after helps neutralize the volatile sulfur compounds on the breath. Not perfectly, but noticeably. More to be desired are they than gold, sweeter also than honey. Psalm 19. I didn't grow up reading the Psalms for nutritional advice, but the more I look at what raw honey actually contains, the less surprised I am that it made the list. Raw honey, and I want to emphasize raw, unpasteurized, produces hydrogen peroxide as a natural byproduct of the glucose oxidase enzyme inside it. That's a mild antiseptic effect. It's also highly acidic, and its low water content creates an osmotic environment that draws moisture out of bacterial cells. 3 separate antimicrobial mechanisms working at once. This is why wound care researchers have studied it seriously. Manuka honey, which comes from New Zealand, has a particular compound called methylglyoxal, MgO, that provides an additional antimicrobial mechanism that doesn't rely on the hydrogen peroxide pathway. Clinical wound care trials have used it on chronic wounds where standard dressings had limited success. I never saw it used once in the wards, not once. The pasteurized honey in the bear-shaped bottle at most grocery stores. That process uses heat that destroys the glucose oxidase enzyme entirely. The antimicrobial activity drops to nearly nothing. The flavor remains. The function is largely gone. This distinction matters if you're reaching for honey with any purpose beyond sweetening. For everyday use, a teaspoon of raw honey in warm, not boiling, water with lemon in the morning. Below about 105 degrees Fahrenheit, the enzymes stay intact. Above that, you start losing them. I use water that's warm to the touch, not water fresh off the boil. For a sore throat or cough, a full tablespoon eaten directly off the spoon, not diluted. Let it coat the throat slowly. A 2007 study in the Archives of Pediatrics and Adolescent Medicine looked at buckwheat honey against dextromethorphan, the active ingredient in most over-the-counter cough syrups for nighttime cough in children. Honey performed at least as well as the medication, and significantly better than no treatment at all. The authors concluded honey was a reasonable alternative, particularly given the evidence at that time that dextromethorphan was not reliably effective in young children. Esau sold his birthright for a bowl of lentil stew. Now, that tells us something about the quality of the stew, or the state of his hunger, but it also tells us lentils were valuable enough to be worth noting. In a world without grocery stores, a pot of protein-dense, shelf-stable food was no small thing. Lentils are one of the most nutrient-dense foods that most people in North America consistently underuse. 100 grams cooked gives you roughly 9 grams of protein, a complete spread of essential amino acids when paired with a grain, which is exactly how they've been eaten for millennia. Over 3 grams of iron, 180 micrograms of folate, and a fiber profile that's split between soluble and insoluble, the soluble fraction acting as a prebiotic, the insoluble fraction providing the mechanical bulk. Here's the part that matters for blood sugar management. A study published in JAMA Internal Medicine in 2012 by Jenkins and colleagues looked at whether replacing starchy foods with legumes, including lentils, could improve glycemic control in people with type 2 diabetes. It could. Lentils have one of the lowest glycemic indices of any starchy food. That means they enter the bloodstream slowly. The rise is gradual. The crash is mild. Your sugar management system, the pancreas, and the receptors in your cells gets a much calmer day of work. Red lentils need no soaking and cook in under 20 minutes. That's my starting point for beginners. Brown and green take longer but hold their shape, useful for salads or side dishes where you want texture. Start with red, master the timing, then move to the others. Rinse them 3 times in cold water before you start. No soaking needed for red. Then 1 part lentils, 2.5 parts cold water into the pan cold. Bring it to a gentle simmer, not a rolling boil, that makes them fall apart. 15 to 18 minutes until just tender. Watch for the moment they soften, but still hold their shape. Salt goes in at the very end. Adding it at the start toughens the skins. Season after you pull them off the heat. Walnuts appear in the Song of Solomon, chapter 6, verse 11. The writer describes going down to the garden of nut trees, which most Hebrew scholars render as walnut trees. It's the only time walnuts are specifically named in Scripture. For a tree to earn a mention in what is essentially a love poem about the land's abundance, it must have been a familiar and valued part of the landscape. I want to talk about the omega-3 content first, because this is where walnuts stand apart from every other nut. A single ounce, about 14 halves, contains 2.5 grams of alpha-linolenic acid, the plant-based omega-3 fatty acid. That's the highest ALA content of any common nut. By comparison, an ounce of almonds gives you virtually none. There's a sub-analysis of the PREDIMED study, published in JAMA Internal Medicine in 2015 by Valls-Pedret and colleagues, that looked at cognitive outcomes over time in adults following a Mediterranean diet supplemented with either extra virgin olive oil or mixed nuts, compared to a control group on a low-fat diet. The control group showed measurable cognitive decline over the follow-up period. The Mediterranean diet groups did not. That distinction, decline versus no decline, held across memory, attention, and composite cognitive scores. These are human beings tracked over years, not lab models. Walnuts also contain ellagic acid, the same polyphenol family as pomegranates, and a compound called juglone that shows antimicrobial properties in laboratory studies. The skin, that thin, papery, bitter layer on the walnut half, is where most of the polyphenols are concentrated. I know people who peel it off. Don't do that. 1 ounce a day, that's it. 14 halves. I weigh them, not obsessively, but enough to know what an ounce looks like in my palm. I eat them mid-morning with a small glass of pomegranate juice, which I've now been doing for about 3 years. Whether it's the combination or just consistency, I don't know. But my inflammation markers at my last checkup were the best they've been in years. Storage matters for walnuts more than almost any nut. The ALA fat is highly susceptible to rancidity. I buy raw, shelled walnuts in small quantities, store them in a sealed glass jar in the refrigerator, and replace them every 3 weeks. A rancid walnut is not just unpleasant. The oxidized fats are not what you want inside your body. If it smells like old paint, it's gone. The spies Moses sent into Canaan came back carrying a single cluster of grapes so large it took 2 men to carry on a pole between them. That's Numbers 13:23. Now, I imagine that's a little poetic, but grapes being significant enough to feature in a scouting report tells you something about how the ancient world valued them. Most people have heard of resveratrol. It's been in health headlines for 20 years. It's a polyphenol found in grape skins and seeds, most concentrated in dark varieties. The early excitement around resveratrol and longevity has been complicated by subsequent research. The doses in animal studies were extremely high, and translating that to human effect is genuinely difficult. What I can say accurately is that resveratrol activates certain proteins related to cellular stress response in laboratory models, and clinical research is ongoing. Not a magic pill. An interesting compound. What's less debated is the quercetin and anthocyanin content. Anthocyanins, the pigments that give dark grapes their color, have well-documented anti-inflammatory activity in preliminary studies. And whole dark grapes are a meaningful source of potassium, over 700 milligrams per 100 grams of raisins. That's higher than a banana, which gets all the credit. Whole grapes, dark varieties, Concord, black muscat if you can find them. The skin and seeds are non-negotiable. That's where the polyphenols are. I eat a small handful with walnuts as an afternoon snack most days. Chew them thoroughly. The seeds too, if they're small enough. For raisins, a small palmful, about a quarter cup, added to oatmeal, to a grain salad, or eaten with a small amount of raw cheese. I use them as a replacement for added sugar in recipes wherever possible. The potassium content alone makes them worth keeping in the pantry. Ezekiel 4:9. Take wheat and barley, beans and lentils, millet and spelt, put them in a storage jar and use them to make bread for yourself. That recipe has been turned into a commercial bread. You may have seen it at the health food store. I bake my own. But what I find interesting is what that particular combination actually provides nutritionally. It's remarkably complete for a bread formula. Spelt is an ancient variety of wheat, Triticum spelta, that predates the modern hybridized wheat most bread is made from today. Its protein content runs between 14 and 15%, which is higher than most modern soft wheat varieties. The gluten structure in spelt is different, more fragile, and water-soluble, which is why some people with wheat sensitivities report tolerating spelt better. I want to be careful here. Spelt still contains gluten, and this is not a claim that it's safe for celiac disease. It isn't. What spelt does have is a good lignan content. Lignans are plant compounds that act as phytoestrogens. They can interact mildly with estrogen receptors in the body. Preliminary research suggests they may have a supportive role for women in postmenopausal transitions. They're also found in flaxseed, in sesame, and in whole rye. The research is ongoing. It's not settled science, but it's science that's been building consistently for 2 decades. I buy spelt berries, the whole, unprocessed grain, and keep them in a glass jar. Half a cup, rinsed, then into a copper pan with 2 cups of cold water. Simmer on low for 45 minutes to an hour until tender. I use it the same way most people use rice. The flavor is nuttier, heartier. It holds up well under a stew or beside roasted vegetables. For bread, a 50-50 mix of spelt flour and whole wheat bread flour. 100% spelt goes flat. The gluten's too fragile to hold gas. The mix gives you the nutrition and a proper rise. Cold ferment overnight, 12 to 15 hours in the refrigerator after shaping. That slow rise develops flavor and improves the digestibility of the grain. Patience is the ingredient most bread recipes leave out. Matthew 23:23. Jesus mentions the tithe of cumin in a list alongside mint and dill. Cumin was significant enough to be taxed. That tells you it was both valuable and common. What most people in the Western world don't know is that the most medicinally interesting member of the cumin family isn't the one on your spice rack. It's a different plant entirely. Nigella sativa, black cumin, also called black seed, contains a compound called thymoquinone. It's the most studied constituent in this plant, and the research body behind it is substantial. A trial published in the Indian Journal of Physiology and Pharmacology in 2010 by Bamosa and colleagues looked at Nigella sativa supplementation in patients with type 2 diabetes over a controlled period. The findings showed a meaningful reduction in fasting blood sugar compared to placebo. There are also multiple studies on thymoquinone's antimicrobial effects in vitro, laboratory studies, not clinical trials, and animal model data on its anti-inflammatory effects. I want to be precise. The clinical human trial data for Nigella sativa is promising, but not yet as robust as, say, the olive oil cardiovascular literature. What it is consistent. The same effects keep showing up across different research groups. 2 ways I use it. First, a teaspoon of black seed oil in the morning. It has a pungent, slightly bitter flavor, somewhat like oregano meets black pepper. I chase it with a small glass of water. Some people mix it into honey. Either works. Second, whole black seeds as a spice. I press them into bread dough before baking, traditional across much of the Middle East and South Asia. I also sprinkle them on hummus, on roasted root vegetables, on yogurt. The flavor is distinctive. Not for everyone, I'll grant you, but if you grow up with it, you miss it when it's gone. Purge me with hyssop, and I shall be clean. Psalm 51:7. Hyssop appears at the Passover in Exodus, the sprigs used to apply the lamb's blood to the doorposts. It appears at the crucifixion, the sponge offered to Jesus raised on a hyssop branch. For a plant to appear at that many pivotal moments, it must have been everywhere and trusted. From a botanical standpoint, hyssop, Hyssopus officinalis, is in the mint family. Its traditional use has centered on the respiratory system, coughs, congestion, bronchial irritation. Ethnopharmacological records across European herbal medicine document this use consistently from the medieval period through the 19th century. The relevant compounds are rosmarinic acid, which is also found in rosemary and sage, and ursolic acid. Both show antioxidant activity in preliminary laboratory data. Clinical trials in humans are limited. I want to be honest about that. What we have is a deep and consistent ethnopharmacological record and preliminary biochemical data that gives those traditional uses a plausible mechanism. That's not the same as a clinical trial, but it's not nothing. Fresh or dried hyssop tea for respiratory support, a tablespoon of fresh leaves, or a teaspoon dried, steeped in just boiled water for 10 minutes covered. The covering matters. The volatile oils that carry most of the benefit will evaporate into the air if you leave the cup open. Strain it. Add raw honey. Drink it warm. I grow hyssop in the beds closest to the back porch because it blooms from midsummer into fall and the bees use it constantly. The creator's design, a plant that supports the respiratory system, also happens to support the pollinators that make the food garden possible. That's not a coincidence I can fully account for. It just is. Psalm 92:12. The righteous will flourish like a palm tree. The date palm was so central to ancient Middle Eastern life that it became a symbol of prosperity. It's one of the oldest cultivated crops in the world, evidence of date. Palm cultivation goes back over 5,000 years in Mesopotamia. And nutritionally, this fruit earned that status. Dates are dense. I want to be upfront about that. They're high in natural sugars, primarily glucose and fructose, which are absorbed quickly. This is not a food to eat carelessly if you're managing blood sugar, but paired with fiber and fat, with a walnut, with yogurt, with a nut butter, the glycemic effect slows considerably. The context of eating matters. What dates offer that offsets that sugar density is remarkable. 100 grams gives you roughly 696 milligrams of potassium, higher than bananas, close to raisins. 8 grams of fiber, mostly insoluble, which supports bowel regularity. 54 milligrams of magnesium, a mineral that most adults in North America are deficient in, and that plays a role in over 300 enzymatic processes, including sleep, muscle function, and nerve signal management. A comprehensive nutritional paper by Al-Shahib and Marshall, published in the International Journal of Food Sciences and Nutrition in 2003, reviewed the full spectrum of date palm fruit composition. The authors describe dates as almost ideal as a whole food, given the combination of energy, minerals, fiber, and antioxidant phenolics. That's a fairly strong statement from a peer-reviewed paper, and it held up to scrutiny when I looked into the citation. 2 medjool dates in the afternoon. Start by pitting them. Press your thumb into the fold and pop the pit out. Press a walnut half into the cavity of each one. The fat and fiber from the walnut slows the sugar absorption, and the combination happens to taste extraordinary. Some gifts from the soil are like that. For date paste, soak 6 or 7 pitted dates in warm water for 20 minutes until swollen and soft. Blend with a small amount of the soaking water until smooth. 1 tablespoon of that paste replaces 1 tablespoon of refined sugar, with fiber, potassium, and magnesium included in the trade. That's not a bad swap. 12 foods, written down thousands of years before the word nutrition existed, and the research keeps catching up to them, not to prove that Scripture is a health manual, but because the people who compiled it were paying very close attention to what kept human beings well. You don't need all 12 at once. Nobody does. Pick 2 or 3, the ones that match what your body's been asking for. Start with olive oil if your heart's been a concern. Start with garlic if you've been catching every cold that comes through. Start with lentils if your energy crashes mid-afternoon and you don't know why. Start somewhere. I've said this before, and I'll say it again. Nothing here is medical advice. I'm a retired nurse sharing what the research says and what my garden has taught me. Your doctor knows your particular situation. These foods support your body. They don't replace the relationship you have with your physician. Now, I'd love to hear from you. Which of these 12 has the most personal history for you? Is there a biblical food your grandmother kept in the kitchen that didn't make my list? Leave it in the comments. I read every one. Some of my best videos have come from that section. If this was useful, subscribe. I put out a new video most weeks, always grounded in what grows, what the research actually says, and what 30 years of watching people get well taught me to notice. God bless you. Stay well. I'll see you in the next one.